you're building a hot rod from scratch.
Barrett Jackson Builds is back. Now, we're going to quickly get you caught up before we move on. Over the last few episodes, we created a plan for our 69 Camaro, as well as we've acquired most of the parts that we need to finish the build.
Yeah, we ended up dropping in the LS3 connecting screws into the Speedtech subframe, so that's ready to go. So
now it's on to the rear suspension.
Nice. Awesome.
Well, Ed, you did the rendering of this, so now that we're starting, we've got all the parts sort of laid out. Now it's down to these guys. What is our decisions on some of the modifications so we can get started?
Well, there's going to be quite a bit done on the back here with the bumper and putting the metal on the actual spoiler on the rear of the trunk lid. It'll look like the factory one. It'll have a spot in the middle that kind of goes down a little bit, just so through the rearview mirror you can see a little bit better, because it will be a little bit taller than the factory one. And then, of course, to tuck the bumpers, to take this area here that's sticking out and mold it into the side of the body.
And you're going to move the side markers too, correct?
We'll probably
right,
just eliminate them.
So it already came tub, so we don't really have to play with anything in the rear wheel wells. It's mostly all external.
But you were talking about, and this is external, but like adding a scoop, functional brake venting, all the things that we're talking about. I mean, this is going to be an extensive project, so we got to see what time's going to allow.
We're actually going to make this rack a full jig to put the subframe, the front metal on it, because the subframe, we can't mount wheels on it. So even though it's sitting here, it's a pretty piece of lift art right now.
Well, and the way we talked this morning, with that very same thought process, we're going to pull the motor suspension back off of that subframe to temporarily mock the subframe onto the body to build an exact replica jig, and then remove it completely out of the equation so we don't damage it, anything like that. But we don't want any variance, because being a solid mounted subframe is something that we don't want to get to a 1/16 of an inch, like you said, back here, but 3 foot forward, that's a 1/2 inch, and all of our lines are off. So we have to be very methodical and really go through the engineering of the thought process to make sure this car doesn't move from point A to the finished product of being painted by Brian. I think this is the starting point. This is where you got a lot of collaboration of ideas, and you try to make this car stand out above all the rest. That's what we're all about. You know, the Builds program, Barrett Jackson, is being at the forefront, and that's what we got to be.
Yeah, and we need to build a car that could go anywhere in the country and be the #1 car at the event. So
I agree with that.
You know, whether we use it on grassroots or take it on road tours or wherever we take this car, it needs to be the one that sticks out.
Yeah.
It needs to be the one that everybody's looking at and going, man, I wish I had that Camaro.
And what are we thinking for wheels?
We've talked with Billet Specialties about a wheel. It's kind of like the old BBS spoke web wheel, real kind of common on like the Pro Touring Resto Mod type cars, but it's a classic look that just never, it's timeless.
And we'll have to get our wheel measuring tool once we have the rear suspension hung to see what capacity of size of wheel and tire, get the most meat we can get under this car and not have any clearance issues.
How low are you going to set it?
Well, that's something we got to figure out with the tire size as well. That's going to depict our ride height.
Slam it and rake it just a hair?
I think you get it where it's a good road touring height.
So you can go over a speed bump without dragging the pan?
I think you have to account for that. I think we have to be real careful to not make it where you have to creep down to 8 miles an hour to get over a speed bump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's other stuff you can do on a 69 to make it even look lower with the rocker panel. Extending it a 1/2 inch will make this whole side of this car look totally different. So there's all kinds of stuff like that that we can do once we get to the ride height and everything to get the look that you're wanting out of it.
All right. Look forward to more ideas. But first, let's get the sheet metal hung on it and start trimming it out.
Yep.
All right.
Let's do it.
Good. Let's have at it.
Sounds good.
Well, now it's time to mock up our front suspension again on the 69 Camaro. Now, we've had the suspension on one time before this to check clearances, put our motor in, check for our header clearances, steering box, all those things. Then took them back apart with the idea that we're going to hang all the sheet metal, get that all set where it needs to be, get it out to the body shop. But one thing we didn't account for, we need to have suspension on the car sitting on its own weight to set all the gaps for all this new metal. Dynacorn bodies are great to start with. The only issue is none of this metal has lived together before, meaning the front fenders, the hood with the body, the deck lids, so we have to make all of that work together before we ever get to body work. So it seems like we go backwards a lot of times, but really these are safety checks along the way. So front suspension, then we'll deal with rear suspension, and then we're off to the body shop. One thing you'll find is the Speedtech kit is exceptionally easy to work with. You know, I always keep a good set of instructions right here because even though I've done several of these different kits, there are a few differences between one thing or the other. You want to make sure and double check all your clearances, all your measuring, make sure you have everything installed properly so that you don't get to the panic mode where you think, hey, oh no, I've got the wrong part or I've got the wrong spindle. Sometimes it's just easy oversight. So read your instructions thoroughly. The pieces pretty much hang themselves. Once you get to that point, you're in good shape. Now, if anybody's wondering why it looks like we have a garbage bag hung on our subframe, this is merely crash wrap that we are wrapping the car in to make sure that we don't make any mistakes while fitting our sheet metal and scratching our fresh powder coat. Even though it looks a little sloppy right now, the idea here is to not back up and have to repaint surfaces or re-powder coat anything by being sloppy. Obviously, everything on the front suspension is adjustable. We're gonna hang everything loosely right now where we can move it wherever we like, get our spindle in place. Once we find a comfortable area with the coilover, we'll tighten everything into place. So again, I've been through the instructions 2 or 3 times thoroughly just to get an idea. About 5 minutes in, realistically, you can have a whole side hung, roughly. Now, obviously, we're missing our coilover still. We're still missing our brakes. But this gives you an idea of what our system is going to look like. And now we'll add our steering rack as well. Obviously, do the other side and move from there. Well, now that I got the Speedtech spindles in place, I'm going to need an extra set of hands for that steering rack.
Yes, that's where I come in.
Yep, let's do it. Hey, Derek.
Yes.
Hey, I need another pair of hands real quick.
No problem.
Okay, so as you know, we had this suspension on it. You've already taken it off once.
Yep.
We're going to put it back together so we can set the car down on wheels and tires so we can settle all these gaps for all this new steel.
Okay.
So the steering rack right now, you know how I'm going to have to balance it between the 2 control arms because they share a bolt. Mm-hmm. So if you will, grab that passenger side.
Okay.
We're going to get it up there in place, run the bolts, and then we'll loosely hang the rest of the remaining parts till we get the other spindle in.
Sweet.
Because we did finally get spindles. I've already got the one on the driver's side. We'll put the passenger one in. And then, obviously, we're going to get our brakes on and check all that as well.
Okay.
So let's go under here and get the steering rack going. Yeah, and this is what's very, very important when you're doing this at home is key components like that. So here.
Yeah, learn the little tricks.
You got to take the bolt loose to loosen the bracket. This bracket here, just to get the bolt started, that's going to go into your axle suspension. If you don't, you're going to end up taking it all the way back down, starting over, which I almost did. That's why I stopped to look at instructions. But the key thing here is people joke about instructions all the time, but really they will save you a ton of time. If you just kind of put your ego aside, your pride a little bit, and read,
suck it up and do
it'll
it
save you a lot of time.
The first time?
Yeah, which, you know, generally doesn't happen the first time, but
hey.
Okay, here we go. Now, for our spindle. Much easier with 2 people, but most of the time, if you don't have a second person, just take a floor jack with a cushion, put it under here, holds up the weight so that you can actually move this stuff around, do what you need to do. Get it.
Got it?
Yep. The main thing is get the components on there, make sure everything works, flows freely. Obviously, nothing is tight.
No, there's a binding.
Yeah, everything's brand new on this car, so you don't have to worry about it as much, but that's the general idea. Obviously, we've got coilovers that got to go in, calipers, all the steering connected to the front and rear wheels, and then we got to move to the rear and make the modifications we got to make back there. So, step 1. Appreciate the help.
Anytime.
Well, now that we have the front suspension, the spindles, and the steering rack in place, now it's time for the front brakes. And as we've seen, we have a bare brake setup for this entire car, 6-piston all the way around. Gonna be a really cool setup when it's all done. So since we're only mocking it up right now, I'm not going to worry about putting anti-seize or all thread or anything like that, or get too tight on any of the bolts. It's merely snug it up, get a good feel of where it's going to live, put it all together and see what happens. you can really appreciate the high quality of these parts and the kind of performance they're going to allow us to have, you get really excited about the project. Minus front sway bar, that's your whole front brake, coilover, steering, and suspension set. And now that we have that in place, we'll start spacing and measuring for wheels, get those ordered. Then we'll put a junk set of wheels on this thing, get it down on its own feet, start measuring up the metal, getting the gaps right, get it off to the body shop. So we made a lot of progress on our 69 Camaro project, but there's still a ton to get done. So stay tuned next week as we move from the front suspension that we've already installed from Speedtech to the rear, as well as we got a bunch of new carbon fiber parts.
Yeah, the guys at BlackTech hooked us up with a whole bunch of carbon for our car. So we got it all unboxed. It all looks killer. Time to let Dustin work his magic.
Oh, yeah. He's got a lot of magic to work.
Yep.